Hey everyone, welcome to Sociastrology. Today we're going to take a look at the Uranus Retrograde, which will be taking place from September of 2025 and will end on February 4th, 2026. This retrograde is going to bring Uranus backward from Gemini, where it entered in July, back into Taurus. And so this is going to be speaking to a period of time which started in 2018 when Uranus first entered Taurus, and will offer us both a catalyst of energy that we've been working on since that point, but also an opportunity on a personal level to integrate some of those lessons that have been brought to us. So we'll look at this on a kind of personal, collective level, then we'll look at it on a global level, and then we'll take this through sign by sign to see how it is that this is likely to impact you based on where Gemini and Taurus are in your chart. So what we're dealing with Uranus is a major catalyst. This is an actor which releases tension. It creates a kind of chain reaction, creates these tipping points for major, sometimes quickly drastic changes. It also represents breakthroughs, quantum leaps, an energy of rebellion or liberation. We can also see a lot of originality, innovation, as well as insight and brilliance with Uranus. So it sparks things off. And when we get a directional shift from Uranus, where it appears as though it is stopping mid-sky and then switching direction, we can see these little twists in the timeline. We can see surprising turns of fate and things like this. So that first station point when Uranus goes retrograde, that's going to take place on the 6th of September. It will then cross that sign threshold backward into Taurus on the 8th of November. It'll continue to go backward in Taurus to about 27 degrees, and that will finally end where it will again do that directional shift, and it will then start moving forward on February 4th of 2026. And then it will enter Gemini permanently on the 26th of April, 2026. And as I mentioned, since July, we've had Uranus in Gemini. So we're doing a couple sign shifts back and forth across that barrier. So once Uranus is moving backward, this is speaking to major internal shifts that we're going to be going through, insights into what it is that we have released in recent years. That is what Uranus does. It releases any sort of constriction or outdated structures that are holding us back. And so this will allow us to integrate a lot of that. And I'm going to come back to that word quite a bit, especially when we get the last retrogrades, which I've spoken to somewhat recently, that we're getting that crossing back over that sign barrier. That really speaks to me of a moment to where we're really able to look over the past several years, again, since 2018, when Uranus first entered Taurus. And rather than having those lessons or experiences continue to be an ongoing thing, this is now about integrating, taking ownership over those shifts and those changes, that liberation that we've had from certain experiences in life. We may have sudden awakenings as to what this has all meant in such a way that sets us up for the coming several years as Uranus moves into Gemini. And what's peculiar about Uranus in Taurus is that Taurus is a fixed earth sign. And so it's just about the most steady, stable, unchangeable energies in the zodiac. And so the fact that Uranus has been going through this area, it's almost as if it has been holding in a lot of the dramatic shifts and changes that we may have liked to see, especially in that area of our charts. It's very difficult wherever Taurus is to catalyze a specific change, especially one after another. But what's good about Taurus is that it can really therefore sit in the lessons and sit in the understanding of what has gone on. So it may feel big time in the coming several months that we're slowing down, that we're processing, that we're reflecting, that we're integrating. And again, like I said, as Uranus is moving into Gemini, things are really going to be speeding up quite a bit. So this gives us a really precious last moment to kind of breathe and take that in before we're really locked in on these new chaotic in a different kind of a way energies. So I also would not be surprised if with these final retrogrades, there's also this reckoning kind of an energy that comes through with it. So there may be a surprising return with that retrograde of some matter, some idea, perspective, some group. These are things that tend to be associated with Uranus. It is a very cerebral, airy type of a planet. And so we may have insights or reminders just come through out of nowhere and remind us of a track that we may have been on at some point, that we may have set aside for some reason, and that we may want to take with us into the future. So this could even be an interest or a hobby or something, but it could absolutely be a Uranian or Taurian type of a person. So someone with very strong beliefs, with strong values, someone who's kind of eccentric but really owns it. And I think we'll see some of that on the global scale as well, but I will call that out and name that in a moment. So another thing that Taurus tends to bring or offer to us is a sense of security. And when Taurus is not feeling secure, that is deeply, deeply uncomfortable. Taurus really needs a strong foundation on which to build things. And so to have Uranus there, I'm sure has been quite maddening, especially if this has been in a very significant part of your chart, if Taurus lies in a very important house. This could have had us feeling for a very long time like there wasn't anything to really grab hold of, that there wasn't a foundation, but we were still needing to build and bring about new things regardless. So looking back over that, I'm glad to say that with Uranus finally moving on for good next year, that Taurus area of our chart, which really does value security, it should enable that to settle down a bit. But questions around insecurities would also be very helpful to look at, because Uranus doesn't just destabilize things for the sake of it. It's pointing out fault lines. It's pointing out if you're feeling insecure about this specific thing, then it might not be on sustainable, solid ground. And so let's look at that. Let's work through that. And we get another chance to do that, to really be deeply, fundamentally honest with ourselves about what truly is secure, what is really stable in our own lives, and how we can cultivate and create that, how we can create stability somewhat out of thin air with Uranus having gone through Taurus. I mean, there's been so many material adjustments that humanity has gone through since 2018 that we probably would not have conceived of as possible given the circumstances. Again, this is offering us an opportunity to recalibrate, to reset, to renew before we step into the Uranus and Gemini period of time, which, by the way, that's going to go on until about 2033, 2034. So again, it's looking back over what is truly secure, what's not secure, how can we come up with ad hoc solutions at times and build upon that and use that as something of a springboard. Having the knowledge of that is going to help us so much with the rapid shifts that we're going to need to do our best to not be distracted by all of the shifts that are going on in the coming several years. And again, just kind of grounding ourselves, finding that sense of security deeply in ourselves, I think is going to be really helpful going forward. And Uranus retrograde in that area of Taurus it's perfectly set up to offer us insights on where that stability is specifically internally. Another thing, it's kind of looking at a similar thing through a different lens, but with this retrograde as well, reviewing those limitations to change. So again, Taurus doesn't really like change, and that is fine for Taurus, but is there an aspect of that part of us wherever we have Taurus in our charts, or when it comes to matters of security, stability, things like this? Are there limitations? Are there constrictions there? Is there an over-reliance upon convention and assuming that maybe if we follow a path that is conventional, that there are more guarantees of stability, that there's greater comfort in that somehow? I think that's something that has been fundamentally put into question since 2018, and I think that we're going to get another push to look at where it is that we may hold ourselves back for fear of change, for fear of that liminal space in between before we get a guarantee that we're going to get our footing on the other side of some shift that it is that we would desire to make, if not for fear of security. Not to mention, where is it that we limit our comfort? So where is it that we allow perhaps anxiety to seep in? Where do we deny ourselves that Taurian comfort? There are moments where we're in something of a liminal state that we could find some comfort in that in between. It's bringing to mind the kind of cliched but still valuable idea of enjoying the journey, focusing less on destination and more on the experiences of what your senses are bringing in at any given time and being able to ground yourself in that. Also, when it comes to conventions, this can be social conventions as well. And I'm not sure if I have it written on the other side, so I want to bring that up now that I'm thinking about it, is like the social norms that have been upended since about 2018. We may see some more of that as well. There's better coming after this, socially speaking. Again, it's not the greatest place for Uranus to be on a broad scale. We can utilize it in our way, but when we're dealing with humanity at large, it's really difficult to get that on the best possible track. And I did just recently do a video about Uranus and Gemini that goes into a bit more of how we can create better and do create better social constructs in those Uranus and Gemini periods of time. But even just generally looking at what it is that we've discovered, new interests, new joys, new pleasures, new awareness of our senses, our comforts, our security, what it is that we just enjoy. What have we discovered along those lines since 2018? Uranus probably played a big part in that because it has to do with our fascination. So what parts of that do we want to take with us into the future? If we can really integrate that now, then we'll have that as something of a token or a souvenir of our experience of Uranus going through Taurus. And we'll be able to take that with us going forward. So I have here Uranus going back into Taurus, as we just saw in Gemini, and then crossing that sign barrier back into Taurus. So on a global scale, we are likely to see more financial shakeups, course corrections when it comes to the economy, as well as economic networks and strategies shifting and changing. And I know that that sounds obnoxious because I know that we've been dealing with that since 2018. It's something that comes with this. We also get matters of labor coming up, wages, things like this, where there are insights and breakthroughs and light shed upon situations that are unsustainable, situations that are not on a firm foundation. So perhaps we can hope that some of these are going to really focus on that course correction aspect. To be perfectly honest, I think it's going to be something of a mixed bag to where it's good and bad news. But I would certainly look at that February 4th timeframe as well, when we get the actual directional shift and pivot in Taurus, that there's likely to be a feeling of being a bit up in the air and not really knowing where it is that we're going to wind up landing. The good news is we then get Uranus, again, moving into Gemini. And that will certainly have a whole lot to do with trade and exchange and commerce and things like this. But it's going to feel less of a material matter, the way that it has for several years now. Less of a financialized kind of a situation. We also, of course, always get breakthroughs, breakdowns, breakout moments when we have Uranus doing significant shifts and changes in the sky. And so I also would not be surprised to see like material breakthroughs when it comes to technology or communications, things like this, networks. If there's some sort of substantial shift and breakthrough in that general overarching industry. Not to mention financial networks, like, how do I put this? Either foreign exchange, currency exchange stuff, or purchasing. We could see a major innovation or breakthrough along those lines to simplify that, basically. And it may be through a breakdown in some way that we wind up getting to that point, but that Taurus Gemini cusp there both of them are relatively financial signs. So Taurus has to deal with the material side of that, and Gemini has to do with the exchange, commerce side of that. So changes along those lines, breakthroughs, innovations along those lines. We also get matters of innocence, sweetness, care, nurturing in Taurus. Groundedness, soundness, basically, is what we often see with Taurus. And that's been getting disrupted for a while. And I think that that is something that we tend to see often with Uranus and Taurus. The past several times that it's been through that area, there's been a similar flavor to those periods of times where there's been this hard shift toward an authoritarian kind of angry mask off energy where the pretenses and even feigned consideration of others tends to go out the window broadly, socially speaking. And so we see the rise of far right often, or at the very least, highly authoritarian efforts. And we see a really far-reaching correction when we get into Uranus and Gemini periods of time. So that is something to really look forward to. But we are getting this little burst again of Uranus in Taurus. And we can't really ignore the fact that that's probably going to look like a resurgence of the far right, maybe coming back together of certain coalitions, things like this, but it will be short-lived. It's just a short stint that it's coming back through here, and then we are full on in the correction phase of that. So with Uranus coming through that area of Taurus, really disrupting, possibly even losing parts of that innocent sweetness, consideration, nurturing, social convention, etiquette, values, things like this. And so I also would not be surprised if there are some really wonderful insights that are shed upon what has been going on, especially since 2018, when it comes to those matters, globally speaking. I mean, last time that we had Uranus and Taurus, there was a major problem with extermination camps in Europe. And now, of course, this last time through, we've seen the same kind of an issue and a kind of disturbing thread connecting them. And what's been especially disturbing about it, but that shouldn't really be too surprising because this usually happens astrologically when we're speaking to a return of a planet to a specific area. So with Uranus and Taurus having been represented by the rise of the Third Reich and everything that came out from that, the fact that in the past couple of years, we've actually seen people hearkening to that to excuse similar types of behavior that are going on right now, which is just mind-blowing. But I hate to say it's not terribly surprising, the fact that Uranus has been in Taurus throughout this too, at least throughout the latest phase of this with regard to what's been going on in Palestine. So with that said, there's also then a fundamental earth principle to Taurus, perhaps, again, more so than any other sign. This is where we get the earthy Venus. This is where we get the moon exalting. And so it speaks very strongly to the kind of Gaian archetype, to Mother Earth, to the environment, to plant life, to the earth as an ecosystem and as a family. So I remember, wasn't it back around 2018? I remember where I was living, there was the whole Extinction Rebellion movement wound up kicking off. And we may see something along those lines of a very strong environmental movement to correct that loss of innocence, that loss of sweetness, that loss of the protection of the earth and the care of the earth. I also would not be surprised to see some pretty extreme weather over the course of this winter in the northern hemisphere, not to mention potentially some more seismic activity as Uranus comes back through and disturbs the earth, disturbs the stability, the patterns that are there. I also wouldn't be surprised if we get some new insights on where we're at with all of that, with regard to the health of the earth and so forth. Also with Taurus ruling the land, property, ownership, things like this, I wouldn't be surprised to see some increased land disputes, consolidation, attempt to exercise authority over land. So there could be something here about sovereignty, which I think we're going to get more into next year, but that may start to bleed into the energies that we're going to get next year around land sovereignty. But I also wouldn't be surprised to see some land grabs and things like that. So hopefully neither that nor property price, like huge fluctuations. This also speaks to matters of food and resource ownership. So again, we're set up in kind of a weird way for this right now. I know with like the harvest coming up in the US, and there's some concerns about that. When it comes to resource ownership, that could also become a major issue. I mean, we're even talking about extracting from national lands. So who owns that, and what are the prices going to be on that, things like that. I wouldn't be surprised to see that or similar kinds of issues around food and resource control coming up. And perhaps not just in the US, it's just I'm here right now in the States, so that is what's freshest in my mind. But it's likely that those issues are going to be coming up in many different parts of the world. And hopefully some of them will be resolved. That's one thing I definitely want to stress with this final retrograde backward into Taurus, is that there is an energy of reckoning or resolution that comes with this last period of time that Uranus will be there. And so hopefully we're leaning more into the breakthrough aspect of this before we even get to the, again, far-reaching corrections to Uranus and Taurus that we typically see when Uranus moves into Gemini and starts to clean a lot of that up. But yeah, really reflecting on the period of time since 2018, especially what's been going on for us mentally, what's been going on for us in terms of our security, our stability. I think that we can look at this period of time and see that that's been a big problem, that we haven't felt very secure or very stable for some time, that we felt when it comes to even like soundness of mind. People have been so much more stressed out, so much more anxious. It's been more difficult to soothe our nerves, to not be in a state of fight or flight, working on those senses and instincts to protect that are in Taurus. And so the extent to which we can, as calmly as we can, look back over this period of time, see where it is that maybe we have learned to ad hoc create a sense of security within ourselves, but looking also back on what has happened to our physical bodies, our stasis, our comfort, and the extent to which we can releasing as much of that as we can. Because we can always wind up creating patterns, and I think that that's one that won't serve us terribly well as Uranus moves into Gemini, where we really are going to need to stabilize our senses and be able to come back to a sense of groundedness. And while that has been disrupted since 2018, we can also get some really strong insights on that. And I mean, if we look at a lot of the breakthroughs in like mind science and understanding of well-being, understanding of the state of our mind and groundedness and how significant that is, we have made a lot of breakthroughs collectively on that front. And so if we're able to integrate and assimilate a lot of that during this period of time, that should help us going forward. And that's one thing I would definitely recommend with this. Finally, I just want to consider perhaps a few other things that are going to come to mind with this. So one thing I would say is that some of the communication breakthroughs that we've had recently may wind up slowing down. So we may wind up running into resource issues when it comes to communication technologies, things like this, that present in a very loud way that we can't really overlook. I don't usually love to gender astrology too strongly, but there is a very strong association of Taurus with women as well. And so we could see some activation going on there as well when it comes to movements and group activity working together. The disruptions that have happened to children as well throughout the past several years may also be a really significant topic of conversation that we wind up getting some insights into. For instance, the fights over education and so forth. Hopefully before those get even more extreme as Uranus goes into Gemini and there starts to actually be a pushback against a more authoritarian style of control over schools. Hopefully we can come back to a state of what's genuinely good for children, what's genuinely going to help them to become sound adults. I also wouldn't be surprised to see a surge in speculation on crypto. That's, again, another thing that we've seen gone totally wild with Uranus in Taurus there. I mean, just look at the values that we had on that back in 2018. I'm pretty sure at that point that Bitcoin was well under 10,000. This is not financial advice, though. I need to throw that out there. This could also really point to matters of consumerism, possessions, tangible expressions of self-worth, property, and looking at that in a different light. So are we recycling things? Are we upcycling things? Are we really utilizing what it is that we have? I wouldn't be surprised to see some movement along the lines of minimalism, simplification, coming back to a sense of comfort and quality and what it is that we have that genuinely impacts our quality of life. Questions of sustainability as well around production. But then I do also want to come back to this question of labor, because we have seen something of a consolidation of a working class identity, at least in the US. I know we've seen that actually with the yellow vests and elsewhere. We may get a very positive kick on that front as well, of understanding of working class values and working class interests that could present a very welcome, I think, disruption to the strains of populism that we've been dealing with recently. Again, the resurgence of that far right. We could see that accompanied with a fallout. I mean, we certainly did the last time that we had going back across this cusp here. There was a lot of pushback around 40, 41, 42. And I think it also became much more clear at that point that, look, in Europe, across Europe, these are not working class movements. These are authoritarian movements. So hopefully we can see a very welcome disruption around ideas and ideology when it comes to working or laboring classes. And finally, one thing I want to point out, I think that I've seen some people attributing to Neptune and Pisces the whole plastic surgery thing that has become really, really, really prevalent. And honestly, that just never totally sit right with me. And when I was thinking through Uranus having to do with the sign of embodiment, the sign of the body, and the kind of invasive, transformative, even sometimes kind of experimental in the US, problematically, sometimes even unregulated exercises that have been more and more and more common, to where there's, and of course we can see this in the kind of like Mar-a-Lago culture, of this specific type of not really human look that a lot of people are going for right now. And I think we're going to see a lot of falling out of that. I don't think that it's a surprise. And I am totally not against plastic surgery or anything like that. But I do think that it's funny that as Uranus has dipped into Gemini, that I watched the second episode of South Park, full disclosure, last night. And they went straight at that issue with regard to Christine Nome. And again, I hate to body shame anyone, but there's a body shaming that is intrinsic to that culture in and of itself. And when I say that, I mean when it's coming to extremes and women are expected to look that way, you know, and making light of that and joking about that now that Uranus is in Gemini, where it's really being called into question, whereas it was just kind of broadly viewed as, no, this is specifically the look that everyone should be going for. I've even, with Uranus now moving into Gemini, I've seen that in a couple other places now where there's the whole removing the fat from the cheeks and stuff like that, and how that has changed the faces of really beautiful people in Hollywood. And again, there's this kind of uncanny valley aspect that winds up playing out with that when it's taken to extremes and when you see it all the time. And to me, what it has felt like is that there's been this expectation that women, again, Taurus, should look like, again, Taurus beauty, beauty standards, and the body should look like AI versions of women. So these AI imaginings of a woman, which, again, when we're dealing with AI, they do come together to one point of this almost platonic ideal that the AI itself is coming up with as to what a woman looks like, right? And with Uranus representing technology and things that can get kind of twisted, things that can be very disruptive and can represent a tipping point to what is a kind of chain reaction where we see so many different people trying to look like this thing that isn't actually human. I think that I would not be surprised if we're going to be coming back to a desire to be able to just look human and have that be accepted. And I think that a lot of the humor, and hopefully it doesn't become too terribly mean-spirited, but I think that a lot of the humor and the pointing that out and making light of that, bringing light to that, is going to be increasingly a matter that we're dealing with. But we can even look as Uranus moves out of Taurus, and Taurus is no longer dealing with Uranus being there. But this last little push into Taurus, I think, is going to be quite fascinating on that front as well. It's going to have a lot to say about that kind of cultural shift that we've taken. And so perhaps that can even elucidate to us a bit of what I'm trying to describe around integrating and reviewing what's been going on since 2018. So on the one hand, more acceptance of plastic surgery and things like that. But on the other hand, it getting out of hand. And so what is it that we want to take with us from that? Perhaps the acceptance of the fact that it's kind of normal and acceptable to want to change certain things. But when we start getting into procedure after procedure that needs to be maintained continually, maybe that's going a bit far, especially if what then we're aiming at is to no longer look like ourselves, but rather to look like something that isn't even a real natural human, as there's that aim toward that AI kind of ideal. But yeah, just a final word on this. Yes, things are going to look like we're at a quicker pace when we're dealing with Uranus and Gemini. But what we're also dealing with is Uranus not in Taurus. And so I think that a lot of the struggling to get a handle on, struggling to maintain a sense of stability, I think we see a lot of that drop off as we get Uranus out of this area. So that I think is something to really look forward to. But again, there's been some useful lessons that we can take from this, and the extent to which we can personally integrate these things, I think the better. That's going to set us up great for Uranus and Gemini permanently starting next year. But yeah, I think that that's mostly what I wanted to say about the Uranus retrograde on this broad level. So we're going to take it through sign by sign now. And before we do, I just want to say thank you so much for being here. And if you don't mind hitting the thumbs up button, I would greatly appreciate that. It helps to spread the video around. And do consider subscribing for future videos. We tend to do this where we look at transits as it's impacting us collectively, politically, economically, and then on a personal level, sign by sign as well. So if you're into that kind of thing, I would love to have you stick around. And thank you so much as well to the members of this channel for your support. So thank you so much to Angel Niblock, Michelle Howell, JJ, Deborah Kale Leavitt, Gary A., Startlingly True, Patrick McKenney, Jody, Anne Marie, C. Rezer, Peace Out, Maria Cyril Hyro, Rachel Windholtz, Lisa S., Aya, The Z-Man 1291, Lynn Newman, Long T Standing, The Nelson Cat Maya, Connie DiMartino, Dali Gizi, Mango JT, B Love, Grace, Psyche Lloyd, Noah, Aquarian, Antiquarian, Susan Martin, Jonathan Mason, Chad Wiseman, Ezekiel, David LaRosa, On the Road, Adrienne K., Chris Wall, Light Warrior 999, Astrology Party, and Samuel Poppin. Thank you all so much for your support. Much love to you. And if you are interested in membership perks and things like that, there's information in the description box below. And without any further ado, let's get into the sign by sign. All right, so for Aries, we have Uranus moving from your third house into your second house. So we can see a lot of thought around material security, matters of income and earning. And you may still be seeking some sense of liberation or freedom or a release of tension or feeling kind of pent up along those lines. So it's likely that there's going to be some insights in this area over the coming several months and bringing through for you some really inventive solutions to any of those issues that have maybe felt a bit up in the air or even a bit stuck here and there. Like there's movement and then it gets stuck, and then there's movement and then it gets stuck. So coming up with solutions or being presented with some opportunities to shift that into a place to where it feels more free to be able to just move and then even settle in a comfortable way to where it's not being stuck, but it's settled. This could even speak to where the third house has to do with your community connections and things like this. Then the second house speaking to your sense of self-worth and rooting your sense of self-worth and trust and self-assurance deeply in yourself. So your comfort levels with being truly yourself out in the open, and regardless of whether or not people accept that, or regardless of whether it is that you feel like you quite fit into a certain situation, being truly yourself and really representing your own values around you with the people around you is also spoken to here. So releasing any rigidity, any inhibitions along those lines around matters of your own self-worth, but then also speaking to your values that are truly outside of concepts of social status or money, things like this that are rooted in the outside world. What is it that you truly value about yourself, about your life? And coming back to that, again, this speaking to the sense of security that is somehow immutable, that isn't changeable depending on circumstances. What is that? Focusing and honing in on that and getting some really wonderful insights about that. I also would not be surprised if there are some really bold decisions where you're kind of breaking free from even the convention of what you would typically do when it comes to matters of earning, saving, income, things like this. Creating opportunities for greater sense of freedom in your own life based on, or free from, perhaps, material considerations. You may even start a new income stream that winds up building in the coming years based on this final push of Uranus through your second house. So, and maybe this is something independent, which Uranus would also love, an independent financial stream of earnings that you can then develop in the coming years. But the spark point being with this last bit of Uranus going through your second house. But yeah, ultimately really just integrating these new ideas of your sense of personal stability. I know it's probably been a bit of a bumpy road since 2018 when it comes to that, but I'm sure that you've seen how not depending upon others for reassurance in that area is really helpful to you and allows you actually to be a lot more secure. And really this period of time is going to speak to just integrating that. It's a really wonderful reminder to hold on to before we move on from this period of time. Also, any sort of review that you can give to limitations or restrictions around change or financial shifts. If you are uncomfortable with making some financial moves that you feel are really right, this would be really wonderful to look at that, because again, like I said, it's probably been a bumpy ride, and that can be then a bit triggering when it comes to the changes that you're wanting to make. So if there's something that's coming up for you and you're feeling a bit nervy about it or reactive due to maybe something having not worked before, or remembering what it's like to feel not firmly rooted, this would be great to really interrogate yourself about that and really look at what is it that you're really afraid of. Is there maybe a way that you can make a transition gently? Additionally, any insecurities that you may have in yourself, they're likely to come up. They're likely to really present themselves to you. And the reason for that is that Uranus is trying to liberate you from those things, to remove those restrictions upon you. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Aries. I would just finally say there may be something coming up about a past revenue stream or something like this that's coming up for review. I can't really say whether you're supposed to grab onto something like that or how it'll exactly present, but I wouldn't be surprised to see something surprising popping up from the past with regard to finances and security as well. But yeah, so thank you so much for spending this time with me, Aries, and I hope that this retrograde treats you super well. All right, so for Taurus, we have Uranus moving from your second house back into your first house. And so this is really about you and your standing, your self-esteem, your self-worth, how it is that you see yourself. So there's been some major changes along those lines since 2018, where you personally have gone through a lot of innovation, a lot of change, probably many phases of reinvention as you come more and more and more into yourself, and a sense of feeling personally liberated from any restrictions that you may place upon yourself. Now, Uranus is about to start speaking to specifically matters of your sense of self-worth, how much you value yourself as well. And so we could see some of that bleeding together throughout this period of time as well, where those questions are kind of folding in on each other. So there could be a huge personal reinvention that you're being called to make based on some insights about self-value that you've come into, or self-reliance, self-assurance, self-assuredness that you've come into in recent months as well. So this is a final push around the evolution of your identity, the evolution of how it is that you see yourself and present yourself to the world, and an opportunity to then integrate that authenticity that's really been gifted to you as an opportunity to really step more into yourself and to free yourself up over the past several years. So it's a really excellent time to reflect on how it is that you have changed since 2018. It might even be worthwhile to specifically look back at 2018. I don't know if you have Facebook. That is always fascinating, looking back on what it is that you were posting in a given period of time, and just reflecting on how far it is that you've come, and how far it is, how much it is that you have changed in the interim there. How maybe your values or your ideas of yourself and the world and your place in the world, how that has all shifted and changed, especially. Also through interacting with people. So whatever I see transiting through the first house, I also see that as how people are approaching us because of a bit of what we're giving off, but also what we're kind of pulling in. And so there may be some opportunities that are surprising for a sense of self-discovery just through your interactions with people. So how people are approaching you and getting a stronger sense of who you are, how you can free yourself up, how you can uninhibit yourself based on what it is that you're seeing from other people, even around you. And yeah, finally, anything that feels really outdated, an old version of yourself, old beliefs, old conditioning, old patterns of how you carry yourself, how you view yourself, that is really begging to be released through this final retrograde here. So if there's anything else that has just been kind of under the surface that maybe you're even a little bit afraid to give up, maybe there are certain inhibitions that you have released, but there's some that you still kind of hold on to for fear of really being seen. If that's the case, this is the perfect time to really release those things and to move much more fully then into a sense of authenticity. But yeah, I mean, I think that that is pretty much what I have for you, Taurus. It's quite straightforward in your first house. I'm personally a Gemini rising, so I'm coming into this time and it's been pretty fascinating. But yeah, I hope that this retrograde treats you super well. And thank you so much for being here. All right, so for Gemini, we have Uranus moving retrograde from your first house back into your 12th house, where it was previously since 2018. And this is such a fascinating alignment here. So this is Uranus coming from your first house of yourself, your body, how it is that you present yourself, how it is that you see yourself. And it's moving backward into the 12th house of your subconscious, your conditioning, your patterns, your inner self, and that which is outside of your control. And so what's so fascinating about this is it's two parts of the self. It's the outer self, that which you show to the world, and then the inner self that you tend to try to hide a bit, or that can even be hidden from you. And so before going into fully this Uranus in Gemini phase, which you've been starting to get a bit of a taste of this summer, but will fully kick in next year. This is bringing you back into that subconscious. It's pulling you back into matters of any hidden issues that may still present. So if you have felt freed up in your interactions with other people, if maybe you felt a little bit more lighthearted, a little bit less inhibited, or at least felt like your inhibitions are kind of being presented to you in certain ways, the work that you've done subconsciously over the past several years, it has really been setting you up for that kind of breaking open personally. So we're going back into the inner world, into the subconscious to look at, okay, what have the tension points been for me as Uranus has been speaking to me directly, and how much of that is rooted in subconscious patterns of thought. So this is an opportunity then to break those old patterns, to break that conditioning so that you can step more fully into your own personal liberation as Uranus moves into your first house. So I would not be surprised if there is in solitude some major breakthroughs that you wind up having. So whether it be dreams, intuition, daydreams, just kind of bolt out of the blue, realizations about your subconscious patterning and how you subconsciously view yourself, where you subconsciously may feel the need to try to control matters out of a sense of fear. And for all of us, what that's ultimately going to be rooted in, it's going to be in the 12th house, but it can be a little bit different for a lot of us. So if there's any resistance to the shakeups and the changes that have been coming up recently with Uranus and Gemini, this is calling on you to really embrace the unknown, to embrace the liminal spaces that change winds up presenting to us, where we have to be in that in-between state, where we have to put ourselves outside of total control of ourselves and our lives in order to bring us into something new, in order to bring us into something that is going to cause us to grow and evolve and feel more and more genuine and authentic as Uranus moves into the first house. So intentionally reflecting, connecting spiritually, intentionally paying attention to not just dreams as omens or things like that, but dreams as a reflection of your subconscious state and looking at that, I think is going to be immensely helpful to assist Uranus in the liberating purge that it's trying to create within your 12th house in order to get you into this kind of clean slate internal situation that is going to facilitate the personal changes, the personal opportunities, the personal breakthroughs that Uranus is going to try to present as it moves into the first house there. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Gemini. It is such a fascinating alignment. Full disclosure, I'm a Gemini rising, so I'm really looking forward to this. I didn't really mind Uranus in Taurus since 2018. It seemed like it was being pretty helpful. And Uranus in Gemini has definitely been a very different kind of an experience. And so I'm looking forward to kind of going back into that sense of like looking inward, looking for any more blockages that can be shaken up, loosened up, and released before stepping fully into the Uranus in the first house there. So yeah, I hope that it treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Cancer, we have Uranus moving retrograde from your 12th house back into your 11th house. And this is quite interesting because the 12th house that you're stepping into, this is speaking to the fact that you're stepping into a sense of deep insight, deep inner liberation, and internal evolution. You're really working fundamentally on yourself and your spirit in the coming years. And you should have some really wonderful breakthroughs if your experience of that is anything like my own. I have Gemini rising, so I'm coming out of that period of time. And this Uranus moving back into your 11th house, this is speaking to social groups, social expectations, friends, beneficial people, hopes, dreams, aspirations, things like that, your social role. And so what's interesting is that this is going from your own internal personal patterning and conditioning, and it's speaking backward to social expectations and social groups and friends and things like this. So one thing I will say off the bat is that some of the shifting of the friendships and group dynamics, things like that, belonging, it's going to be around like what social roles have you taken on that just don't feel right anymore? And especially, are there people involved or are there groups or dynamics involved that you feel like are holding you back when it comes to a sense of true, thorough personal evolution and personal development that you're going to be experiencing in the coming several years? And you're very likely then requested by this retrograde to release more of that. So this may be just creating less space and time in your life for people who aren't pushing you forward, for people who aren't contributing in some way to your growth, or at the very least are hindering your growth. So it's likely that it'll be for those types of reasons that your friendship and group dynamics will be shifting. That's one thing I definitely want to make clear. It's setting you up for that next phase here. So integrating your new perspectives on community and belonging that Uranus has brought to you over the past several years, integrating those lessons around where is it that you feel like you can be authentically yourself, and are the benefits really worth it, the material potential benefits really worth it to contribute time and energy to group dynamics that cause you to feel like you need to kind of put up a front or something like this, because then that has those impacts on you internally. Is that really worth it? So integrating what it is that feels like it supports your growth as much as possible in the group dynamics that you're contributing to. You may well find, aside from a lot of this, you may find that in the coming several years, you're actually coming into a more introspective period of time where you're spending a lot more time with yourself and on your own projects. And part of that is likely to include, again, releasing those social ties that feel like they are holding you back from getting the best out of that time that you have to yourself. So people that are just kind of taking up space and they aren't really contributing anything. If I haven't belabored that point to death at this point, I'm just trying to be as clear as I can around that. So with this final retrograde as well, really reevaluating hopes and goals. You've probably had a lot of movement along those lines since 2018, shifts, changes, new things that you've been pursuing. This is calling on you to reevaluate those things before you go forward. So There may be a personal project that you're wanting to kick off either this year or as a kind of down the road in a couple of years. This is what I hope to be working on, kind of a thing. And this is really putting you in a position of clarifying what it is that you're wanting to see from that, what it is that you're trying to create for yourself along those lines before you start to do the solo intensive kind of work that is going to be set up for you in the coming several years. So yeah, finally, if there are networks around you that do really support evolution, growth, individuality, perhaps even your sense of spirituality or your underlying values and compassion, things like this, those kind of wonderful aspects of yourself, if you feel that those are supported by anyone or any groups or things like that, identities that are around you, there is no need at all to purge from that. In fact, if you see something like that around you that you feel like could help with the personal journey that you're going to be going on, not just as Uranus goes into your 12th, but then even after that, as Uranus goes into your first house for 7 years following that. So this personal journey that you're kicking off now, if there's social support around you, that is great and wonderful. And I would say that that should stick around. And if you're wanting to kick off anything like that, if you're wanting to get involved in a group that you think is going to be of a lot of support for you in that, or inspiration for you in that, in the coming years, I would definitely recommend that as well. I would expect that there should be some kind of last minute opportunities along those lines with this retrograde. But yeah, I think that that is pretty much what I have for you for now, Cancer. So yeah, I hope that this retrograde treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Leo, we have Uranus moving retrograde from your 11th house back into your 10th house. So this is moving from the place of friends, allies, social groups, social expectations, hopes, dreams, aspirations. And it's moving back into your house of your social role, your public facing life, your career, your reputation, your legacy, what it is that you're creating out in the world. So these two play together usually along the lines of accomplishments, aspirations. And so there's likely to be a lot of movement along those lines throughout this several months here. You may have recently had some new ideas come up about what it is that you're wanting to do. And you're being brought back to look at some of the resources, some of what you already have here going for you in your 10th house, to see perhaps how you can utilize some of that going forward to like something of a launch pad, basically, for the next steps, the next phase of your life. And this could represent something of a shakeup in your career or an evolving role that's setting you up for the next stage. So I also would not be surprised if there is a new kind of realignment when it comes to your career, and not just in what you're hoping to happen, but opportunities basically being presented to you. And it would be great to really reflect on what your ambitions are, and if the opportunities that are available to you currently really align with your idea of your future. If they're not, and especially if you've been feeling any underlying resistance along the lines of your career or your public life, this would be great to really take a look at that. I would recommend trying not to sweep anything under the rug when it comes to just feeling like something's a little bit off there. This is a great kind of final opportunity to redefine this for you. And so, like I said, I wouldn't be surprised to see opportunities along these lines, but I also would say if that's not immediately presenting itself to you right now, but you're feeling kind of uncomfortable with where you're at, reflecting on that, thinking about that, you're likely to get some really wonderful insights into how it is that you can get to where it is that you're wanting to go. Because Uranus in your 11th house should be opening up a huge amount of opportunities for you, but the clearer that you can be about what it is that you want for your career or your public life to look like, the better and the easier it is to identify those opportunities that are coming in, which you're really going to want to take hold of and which you may want to let pass you by. You may also find yourself presented with an unconventional path, or integrating, assimilating, accepting the idea of following an unconventional path. Because again, you have Taurus in the 10th. So there may be something of a comfort zone there around convention, around the way that things are done, around certain guarantees and things like this. But if this Uranus transit has had you taking a different type of tack than usual, that may have been shaking you out of something of a comfort zone. So you may be really pushed this last time to follow that and integrate that, or to simply accept and recognize the fact that if you are following an unconventional path, it's likely because that is much more aligned with your values than the usual way of doing things would. And yeah, ultimately what this is speaking to from my perspective is clarity around your perspective of what external success means to you. And so that's that kind of like unconventional path. It might not look the way that it's usually handed out to people as this is what's successful, this is what is kind of weird or whatever. This is really about defining for yourself, clarifying your own perspective of what success means to you. And maybe it would even be wonderful to play with some timeline stuff of what did you envision success to be when you were young, and imagining looking back on your life from a future perspective. What do you feel like success would look like to you at that point? And is there a way that you can kind of bridge that together and come to something that is less reacting to the moment, or less trying to reach something that has been set out for you by someone else or by society? And ultimately what that's going to allow for you to do is to grab onto the opportunities that are presented to you in the coming several years that truly make you feel liberated, free, authentic, and like you're able to forge your own way through life and still identify as being successful. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Leo. So yeah, I hope that this retrograde treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Virgo, we have Uranus moving retrograde from your 10th house back into your 9th house. So this is really all about your expansion into the world. This is bridging the gap between your beliefs, your philosophy, your worldview, and then the ambitions that you carry around what it is that you want for your role to be in the world. So tying those things together, this retrograde as it goes back into your 9th house is really going to be providing a lot of insights into your belief systems, and especially any shifts or changes that I'm sure have been quite significant since 2018 for you. You may have felt like you've just learned so much since 2018 about what it is that you believe, feeling like you have had massive breakthroughs when it comes to expanding your horizons, whether physically in terms of like global reach, or more cerebrally in terms of your knowledge base and your understanding of your spiritual beliefs, your ideological beliefs, your worldview. So I would really recommend throughout this period of time to embrace and welcome, take fully on board enthusiastically those who are expanding or challenging your perspective. This may feel like a big shakeup, but we're never really going to hold on to stuff from Uranus that isn't liberating in some way, that doesn't contribute to us. So there's not much risk of that. The biggest risk with Uranus is that there's a temporary shakeup that points out to us what it is that we don't want. So with that as the worst case scenario, and with the best case scenario being that someone's going to come in and present something to you that is going to represent a major breakthrough in your perspective on the world, I would say to stay as open to different perspectives as you can over the course of the coming several months. Also actively exploring, teaching, learning. Any courses that really catch your eye, that seem fascinating, they're more likely to have a substantive impact on you and your perspective with Uranus in this place. So with one last push along those lines, you may well be presented an opportunity to take something like that on, whether it is disseminating what it is that you know and sharing that with others, and having that also then be an important experience for you personally, but also then having a big impact on other people or learning from others and taking that on. Also, potentially some significant opportunities for travel or to explore philosophy, spirituality. If there are any books or channels, things like this that really catch your eye when it comes to philosophy, I would recommend digging into that, taking that on. And travel opportunities. You could have some travel disruptions for sure with Uranus in this place, but again, it's likely to break you open in a way. So it seems quite worth it to me. Also, any dogmas that you may carry, any really set in stone perspectives that you may have, whatever it is that we believe, whether or not we're right, that can feel too confining because it can really be difficult to fully understand where it is that we're coming from if we're not willing to play devil's advocate with ourselves and challenge our own beliefs. So when it comes to, for one thing, any sort of dogmas that we may carry about the world, any rigid beliefs about the world or different cultures, different topics, I would stay as open as you can and perhaps even intentionally try to shake those things up in this time. But also any sort of ready-made worldviews, any sort of ready-made ideologies or things like this that you may subscribe to because you're mostly on board with that, and maybe you sweep aside little disagreements here and there. That's great for maintaining harmony, of course, but if it prevents you from exploring some little idiosyncrasies within your perspective, within your worldview, those are major gifts for people to have and to present. And so if you feel boxed in and like there is something that fascinates you, but that you don't quite feel like your identity allows for you to explore it, I would really recommend looking that right in the face and challenging that and breaking out of any sort of boxes like that, because that's where you're going to then spur the next level growth and personal development that we tend to see in the ninth house. Also really redefining freedom and expansion. So there may be this very abstract thing that winds up coming in for you. This is a pretty abstract house here, and it is really around freedom and expansion, and so is Uranus. And it's around opportunities for that and ideology and ideas and systems of thought around that. So this is super abstract, but I'm going to try and get the point across of like, what does freedom mean to you? What does expansion? What does personal development? What does the growth journey or the evolution of an individual throughout their lives for you mean to you? You get to define that for yourself, especially when we're talking about the ninth house. That is full on yours, and just how it is that you take on ideas from other things, if they align with you. And if they don't, you don't have to take them on. But really looking at that and defining that for yourself, I think it can clarify for you, especially as you go into Uranus going into your 10th house. That can really clarify for you the direction it is that you're wanting to be going. So how it is then that these definitions for yourself of your own evolution and all the other words that I used for that, but your own evolution and the direction of that you're seeking on a fundamental level, on like a spiritual kind of a level, how it is that when it comes to your social role and the world and social constructs and things like this, society basically, how is it that you can step into that and turn that sense of evolution into a type of ambition? And how is it that you can realize that in your life? That may seem like a tall order, and if it seems kind of daunting, you don't need to define it at all in the words that I've just used. Like I said, redefining all of this for yourself. But how is it that you can kind of realize the abstract aspects of the ninth house into the 10th so that you can create more of that in a more substantial way in your future is basically what I'm trying to get at there. And so, yeah, also following your curiosity, like I mentioned, I think when it comes to teaching and learning, if there's something that catches your eye or sparks your imagination, sparks your mind, I would say grab onto it. Even if it feels outside the box, that's usually what Uranus is trying to work with anyway. It's trying to break you outside of that box. So if there's something that is, maybe you're even rabbit holing on something, Uranus can totally, especially Uranus and Taurus, which is going to get kind of fixated on something. I would say to really pursue something like that, because it's likely to bring you into a direction that you would not have naturally thought of, but could have a pretty profound impact on your ideas and your perspectives. Not to mention to open up some really interesting and kind of synchronistic opportunities for you as well. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Virgo. So yeah, I hope that this transit treats you super well, and thank you so much for being here. All right, so for Libra, we have Uranus retrograde moving backward from your 9th house back into your 8th house. And this is an interesting kind of a cusp to be dealing with here, because the 8th house is a place where we can feel really attached to things and almost feel kind of stuck or locked in to something that is outside of ourselves. Whereas the 9th house is really about exploring who we are fully. It's about freedom. It's about perspective. It's pretty abstract and cerebral and very curious and open. And so there is likely that since 2018 or so, that Uranus has been working on attachments around fears or interdependencies, power dynamics, matters of control, matters of trust, commitments, things like this. People that you feel are really entwined within your life, and shakeups along those lines, and trying to free you up from some things that perhaps felt kind of stuck. So with it now moving into the 9th house permanently next year for a little bit this year before this retrograde, it's now trying to push you beyond that point. It's not just about now releasing some attachments and things like that, but it's in the future, it's going to be about taking that lack of attachment and pushing it into an actual fundamental fascination with, okay, how much can I expand? How much can I be open? How much can I grow? How much is it that I can open up my perspective and expect for great things to happen by letting go and being really free? So with this retrograde then back into your 8th house, it's trying to shake up again those matters of attachments, any sort of old fears, any like holding on to what other people think of certain issues, of holding kind of on to other people for a sense of security or stability. When it comes to any outdated commitments to either people or to certain ways of relating to other people for the security of the assurance that things are going harmoniously with others. Again, with your Libra rising and having Taurus in this place, it's kind of a natural thing, is wanting to have that harmony with other people. And that can put us into a space of feeling like we're really reaching way more than halfway, you know? So Uranus having come through there, trying to shake that up, you're going back into that space to look at that finally again. One, recognize how far you've come with that, because that's not an easy kind of a transition to experience. These are some of the hardest things to let go of in life. And so the extent to which you've been able to do that, to really give yourself a pat on the back, and perhaps then assuring yourself that as you really open up in the coming years with that going into your 9th, that you're safe and you're good and you can handle it. And, you know, you have that strength to you to let go, to release. And so looking at those old fears, attachments, taboos, things that you try to control or maybe be a little bit rigid around, releasing those things for healing. So both looking back on and then trying to complete and to integrate that emotional transformation. Also, potentially on a kind of literal level, surprises, reorganization of shared finances and commitments. So I wouldn't be surprised to see some shakeups when it comes to commitments. And this isn't just shared finances with other people. Banks, loans, things like that also show up here. Business partners, clients can show up here. Wherever it is that our lives are intersecting with the resources of others, I would also really say, to me, the shared resources or the other people's resources that come up in the 8th house, I also tend to see this as power dynamics. And so psychological proclivities of those around you, how much it is that you over accommodate that, how much it is that you may pull in people who kind of build up attachments as well, things like that. I would expect some surprises and shakeups along those lines. And it may be that you are kind of fed up with something. You may already kind of know what this would wind up shaking up, because it probably would be something that has felt stuck, that has felt like, man, I wish I could change this up, but I'm just not sure exactly how. Those are usually the moments in which we get a lot of assistance from Uranus. If we're not doing it, sometimes Uranus will straight up do something to make it perfectly clear to us what we need to do, or to take something away that's holding us back or holding us in. So yeah, on a literal level, I wouldn't be surprised to see something like that come through. Also with Uranus here, we do get both deepening and detaching from relationships here, because if we are inhibited, if we are not trusting other people, we can really be presented with some opportunities to open up. And to me, I'm going to be preaching here for a moment, but to me, opening up to people truly in a healthy way that's not dependent, being able to be vulnerable with other people, so much of that is rooted in our own trust of ourselves to know when to pull back from certain things. I think that that's where a lot of those early walls, the too early walls that come up with people, the little triggers and things like that can cause us to retreat basically from a situation and not be vulnerable. Those fears around vulnerabilities and things like that, ultimately really rooted in a lack of trust for ourselves to know what's healthy, what's not, and where those lines should really be drawn. And so drawing them early in order to protect ourselves from drawing them too late. So Uranus being in that place, I'm sure has also presented some awareness of, okay, this is where those boundaries should be, and this is where you don't need to draw them yet. This is where the vulnerability is fine, and maybe that is just truly being yourself with someone else and not fearing that there's going to be some rejection or something like that, and deepening connections in that sense. But again, where those boundaries do need to be drawn and where you don't need someone so much as to allow them to cross boundaries for you, or to over accommodate someone who is accidentally crossing boundaries, detaching and helping to detach from those kinds of connections, or at least get some space. Uranus will also create some separation, as in just let's pull back a bit from this, even if we're not cutting someone off completely. And it also gives a lot of opportunity to confront some power dynamics. So Uranus is not the biggest fan of that kind of a thing where someone else is calling the shots for someone else. So we should be free and liberated and sovereign in ourselves. That is the theory of Uranus here. And so when we are trying to control other people, we can get some really weird reactions from Uranus and some major pitfalls that we wind up kind of running straight into. But if someone is having control over us, it can offer some really liberating insights on that. It's usually not going to let that go unseen. It will become something that we cannot unsee because it'll get loud enough to where we can't ignore it. So it gives us the opportunity to confront those power dynamics. It also enables us, especially for you, again, having Venus rule your first and eighth house here, it also offers you the opportunity to act a bit out of character as necessary to confront and address a power dynamic, especially if you are conflict averse, which I would expect that you typically are. And yeah, ultimately, 100% what this is boiling down to, releasing control, trusting yourself, case by case basis, moment by moment basis, to respond to whatever's going on in that moment, to not need to feel like we need to exercise too much or give over too much control to something else. And again, ultimately, this is really opening you up for that ninth house transit, which is going to be lightening the living heck out of your spirit and opening you up immensely. So yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Libra. So it's fascinating. If you're tired of dealing with this energy, it's just a little bit longer, you know. Looking back on how far you've come should hopefully help you to appreciate this kind of weird transit that you've had for a while here. But yeah, I hope that this retrograde treats you super well. And thank you so much for being here. All right. So for Scorpio, we have Uranus going retrograde from your eighth house backward into your seventh house. So this is 100% dealing with connections, relationships, commitments with other people, and how it is that you do relationships with other people. So to me, there's usually major blurred lines between seventh and eighth house matters as it is. Seventh house tends to have to do with specifically the people that we connect with, how it is that we view relationships. It is the people close to us. So our close one-on-one friends, our romantic partners, our business partners, and other people, generally speaking. So the eighth house then, to me, has to do with how we then start to really blend with them. So it has to do with other people's resources, yes, and that can absolutely be financial, but it is also emotional and psychological to me as well, of the emotional and psychological state of people that we usually wind up getting deeply involved in, and yes, what that is reflecting in us as well. It's usually not a one-to-one thing. It's usually kind of an opposite thing. It also speaks of, both of these really speak to contracts, commitments, as well as attachments, vulnerability, intimacy, things like this. So this area is really getting called to your attention in the coming several months here, how it is that you relate to others, especially in close connections. So there could be recently, I'm just going to lay out a specific scenario. So for instance, in a connection that you've had for some time, you may have, or even it might even be new, but you may have recognized some unhealthy behaviors in someone that you're connected to. And it may have even called into question for you some of what it is that you're bringing to the scenario, why it is maybe that you're accommodating something like that, what it is that you're afraid to call out with people. And you may be looking at this as that connection. I would wager that there's a pattern that's being pointed out by Uranus here. It's usually going to speak to something more significant. And this is the one time that you're going to get, this year is the one time that you're going to get Uranus traipsing back and forth over this cusp. So it's trying to liberate you. It's trying to free you up and point out something that's not working. Now, that is probably speaking to a specific connection, yes. But it may also be a pattern, so worth kind of digging into on that front as well. I would also say that you may decide that you don't want to do something like that anymore, and that's either going to require that a relationship shift and change and take on a different form, or it's going to require stepping back from or even cutting off a connection with someone. So that is a specific scenario that feel free to kind of extrapolate along the edges of that. And we'll get into some other stuff, but that is most straightforwardly what I would see in this transit. So destabilizing or illuminating relationships, realizations around relationships, and especially how it is that you relate. Are you overly accommodating? Are there certain expectations that you have about relationships that aren't getting met, either by the people that you're connected with currently or as a pattern? Digging into that is great. Uranus will help you, and it'll make it easier for you to get those insights on that. You may have someone surprising also show up, someone that has been close to you. And ultimately, what this is speaking to is releasing those codependent patterns or any sort of codependent roles, things like that. It's not the worst thing in the world. I would say, just based on my observation, most people are codependent. I mean, it takes a lot of being super self-aware to not fall into that kind of thing, because we're social creatures. And it's a part of like human survival to have a social network and to be accepted into the group. If evolutionarily for a while, if we weren't, that would have led to probably our demise, you know? And so it's natural for us to be a bit codependent, but sometimes we can get kind of heavy into that in a way that isn't ultimately helpful to us. So releasing those codependent patterns and roles, and ultimately that is speaking to freeing yourself up. So freeing yourself up to be able to be more authentic, to be able to trust in yourself more, to be able to react to things on a case-by-case basis and not pull the past into the present when it comes to triggers and things like this with connections and commitments. And then I would say, if you want to redefine, like just sitting down, thinking through, what is it that you want from your relationships? How is it that you want to feel? How is it that you want to be treated? How is it that you want to be seen? What is it that you can do to support that? And then what are your specific boundaries? What is not acceptable to you? And creating intentions around that can be immensely helpful to not letting things slip too much along those lines. We're all going to have those things slip at some points here and there, and we shouldn't beat ourselves up about that. But if you can just get as clear as you can about what it is that you are expecting, what it is that you're wanting, and what enables you to feel authentic within your connections and safe, and like, even if you're quirky or weird or eccentric or whatever, that's going to be accepted. Even if you go against certain social norms, either broadly speaking or of the group, feeling accepted, if not in spite of that, perhaps even because of that. So how is it that you can recognize that kind of a thing in a connection with someone? And how is it that you can seek connections like that out? You may even absolutely have some unexpected connections come in that wind up sparking up those shifts as well. So some real like spark plug people coming in that may shake you out of a comfort zone. It may actually feel like triggers at a certain point. And I wouldn't say to sweep that aside, but I would say evaluate that from the assumption that you are safe, so that if there's something that you can really get out of that in terms of insights on yourself, that you're at least digging into that as well. Some catalyst type people. I wouldn't be surprised if they're coming in. And yeah, reshaping how it is that you relate, getting really clear about that, because there will be some continued tests along those lines as Uranus moves into your 8th house. It's going to be working on your matters of trust of self and other people, and whether you feel comfortable being vulnerable with others, what you feel inhibited around things like this, how it is that you connect and commit and so forth. So getting yourself as prepared for that as you can with Uranus in your 7th, and looking at your actually existing connections and past connections and kind of analyzing those, putting your mind on those, I think could be really helpful for stepping into that Uranus in the 8th transit with a really clear view, so that there's less things to kind of trip you up along the way. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Scorpio. It is a fascinating one, and I would expect some surprises in relationships for sure. So I hope that this retrograde treats you super well, and thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Sagittarius, we have Uranus going retrograde from your 7th house of other people, close one-on-one relationships with like one-on-one friends, partners, whether romantic or business partners, contracts, agreements, things like that, other people, backward into your 6th house of service, health, work, routine, habits, things like this. So it's likely that there's going to be coming up some questions around service to others and how much that is an aspect of your life and your experience. So one thing is, off the bat, just on a literal level, one way I would expect for this to play out is that someone needs your help or someone is helping you out. in a pretty substantial way. There could be a health thing that's coming up with other people. This could be getting healthy with other people. And that could be abstract in the sense of healthy relationships or physical health, like having a gym buddy or something like this. But on a more abstract level, the way that I would feel like this would speak to that cusp that's getting crossed repeatedly this year is how much of your energy do you put into pleasing the people that are directly around you? That is a wonderful thing to do. But when we feel confined and like we have to, maybe in order to be accepted, or when we simply feel drained because we're putting a lot of energy into the desires of other people and not ourselves, that can become certainly an issue when we go a bit overboard there. So that may also be a more abstract kind of a thing, a matter or a theme that's coming up this year. And it's coming up to point it out to you, hey, you're feeling too confined in this way. Or if you have felt kind of disconnected from other people, maybe being of service to others can enable you to feel like you are more connected to those around you. So yeah, those are some of those things about that cusp that I would really keep an eye open for. But with this going back into your 6th house, we can also expect some major shifts in your routines, in your health, in your work, just kind of generally speaking. So this could be the specific activities that you're needing to do, your work tasks. This could even be skills that you are developing. This could be shifts and changes with coworkers. So it could be a weird kind of a turnover, either people leaving and more people coming in, or like sometimes people leave and then a company will decide we're just going to take that job and divvy it up across different people. And so then you have these extra tasks that you have to do, kind of redefining what your job is. And super fun, but don't we live in that stage of capitalism right now? So also wouldn't be super surprising. But if you have employees, this could also speak to changes with employees and subordinates even. There could even be a health habit that is coming to a point of breakage to where you have to address something that maybe you've been trying to not deal with head on. Basically, if there's something to do with your health or well-being that isn't fully satisfying to you, Uranus in your 6th offers you opportunities to more readily make that shift and break out of that. So you have the assistance there if you want to take hold of that and run with it. And I wouldn't be surprised also if that's the case that new approaches to integrating wellness, like health regimens, wind up being actively presented to you. So I would also kind of stay open. If there's something that you keep seeing pop up, there may be some kind of a synchronicity or something like this around a specific system, basically, of doing things that may well work very well for you. Also, when it comes to productivity. So you may need to reorganize. I mean, this could even be if you work in an office, having to switch rooms or something like this, and therefore reorganizing, reworking maybe a productivity framework or system or whatever that you have. This could also be changes in your work life of like working remotely more or less. But yeah, basically disruptions to habits and that spurring realignment then. So that's the aspect of this that I would recommend focusing in on, is that if there are those kinds of disruptions to your routines or to your habits or to your work life, things like this, try to conceive of it as trying to realign you so that you can make the little tweaks that you may have been putting off or may not have seemed very important. I also wouldn't be shy to follow some unconventional methods that are good for your health. So physical, mental, emotional, spiritual well-being. Unconventional methods along those lines could really spur a better experience of your life, your body, your mind, your state of being, basically. Unconventional methods could be very supportive to your state of being and offer some really awesome breakthroughs there. one thing I would definitely recommend, in addition to simply experimenting with different things, if you're not getting, hit up with all sorts of synchronicities around, hey, try this method of organizing, or, try this, regimen or whatever, I would recommend experimenting wherever Uranus is. Try things out, see if they work. If they don't, no biggie. You don't need to stick with it. Uranus will never decide that you need to stick with something if it's not great. So trying different kinds of methods. Maybe you even want to actively reorganize an office space, or even your home, wherever you do routine tasks and things like this. You may want to reorganize your schedule and just experiment with different types of things to see if you can free up, again, that state of being, your just general experience of your day-to-day life. And also releasing any sort of perfectionism, especially perfectionism which somehow relates to other people. So if you think that other people expect perfection from you, and you therefore hold yourself to that standard, for one thing, or if you allow for a desire to control your output and your productivity and things like that, if that starts to bleed into your connections and disrupt those a bit, try your best to release that perfectionism. Try your best to release those constraints on you and on others, for sure. Finally, I wouldn't be surprised if there are some distractions, for sure. Uranus can just kind of present things left and right here and there, and it can represent disruption. So to your routine can definitely be some distractions when you're trying to get things done. And some of them may be very welcome. It may really shake up your routine in a way that makes you feel less stagnant, if that's been an issue. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Sagittarius. So yeah, I hope that this retrograde treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Capricorn, we have Uranus going retrograde from your 6th house backward into your 5th house. So this cusp, to me, speaks to very different aspects of experience. So the 5th house tends to speak to our joys, what it is that we do for fun, the connections that we have that are fun, like friendships, romances, things like that. What we get excited about, what we're lighthearted about. It speaks directly to our children and our childlike nature, our creative and authentic expression, so on. The 6th house is very different. That is much more serious. So it is our work routines, our habits, our skill sets, our health, our state of being. And so with Uranus going back and forth across this cusp, what that is saying to me is that it will be trying to bring to your attention where your routine is not fun, where your routine is not how you would like it to be. And it is trying to spur you on to blend these energies a bit, to make your daily life more lighthearted, and to free yourself from constraints to where you feel like, no, I need to be clear and serious and productive about these aspects of my life. It's trying to make that much less serious so that you feel like that's less confining, so that you're able to accomplish the things that you're trying to do without feeling drained or constrained by that. So that's one big thing that is for sure going to be a theme around this period of time. And you should get some great opportunities to act on that, to create that basically. But with this going back into your 5th house and speaking to the transit that it's done since 2018 in your 5th house, this is a final kind of an opportunity to bring in some new forms of creative expression, and is very likely to present these sudden bursts of inspiration. So that may be another way I could see this cusp action going on, is like wanting to take a hobby or an interest and turn that into work. So you may feel very inspired along those lines too. Your creative skill set is very much in this area of the chart. So interesting solutions along those lines around how do I get my creative side and my productive side to blend together? How can I pull those things together? Of course, one of the ways to do that would be if you have a hobby or an interest that you can turn into work. This could be a really wonderful catalyzing period of time to get you started with something like that, or to spin something like that up. This also stirs up a huge amount of surprises, and typically very pleasant surprises that are fun, that connect you to your passions, that can bring in a sense of lightheartedness and a sense of really enjoying when you don't feel the need to control things, to where you can just kind of let things unfold as they may and trust with a childlike open heart. So I would keep your eyes open for opportunities like that. I mean, this will be the holiday time as well when this is back in that space. So it may surround the holidays as well. And that'll run even all the way to springtime. And even looking at this as a time frame, if you are a person who sets resolutions for the new year, I would say anything along the lines of bringing more fun into your daily life would be a great thing to try to kick off with this. So yeah, reconnecting with joy, pleasure, personal freedom, creative expression. There could be a new interest or a new hobby that you wind up kicking off around this time too, that is becoming something that you're then working on honing in the coming years, with Uranus then moving into your 6th house, where it becomes a little bit more serious and trying to perfect something. If you have children, there's likely to be some extra surprises with them. I'm sure there has been since 2018, but some new surprises with them, or any projects that you're doing, any projects that you have birthed or art that you have created. This is the place of your creation. So what it is that you've created, going through a really wonderful final burst of evolution and maybe even reorientation. So let's just say if you paint or something, this could bring in one final little medium or push or style that really solidifies how it is that you do that, the way that you like to do that, and then working in the coming years to perfect that final piece of the puzzle there. And yeah, on a personal, kind of subconscious, emotional, psychological level, this is really about releasing your inhibitions and any sort of fears of being seen for your authentic self, of your creative expression being judged, things like that, throwing those yokes the heck off, because Uranus is not going to be too fond of any sort of inhibitions like that. Releasing any inhibitions as well about being joyful. The world has been so serious for so many years. And I have this thing that I love. I watch for fun British panel shows like the Big Fat Quiz and like QI and all of those that have been ongoing for a really long time. Like Would I Lie to You? These things. And so they've been ongoing for a long time, and I tend to watch them on YouTube. I'll just find whatever episode is popping up that maybe I haven't seen, or maybe I have seen it like 10 times, but I know I like it. And it's so funny when I go back to 2013, 2015, and just how much less serious people were. Everything seems like it's like minefields and eggshells, and everyone's so focused on survival and all this stuff. And Uranus in Taurus has been such a huge part of that, to the point where it almost feels wrong. I feel this way big time. Just, knowing what's going on in the world, sometimes I can be really hard on myself about just having fun and just being carefree at times. And so that's also likely to be something that is being presented to you as just being okay with being seen as joyful, as goofy, as just having fun. Like, that is what we are here to do. And so Uranus bringing that insight back to you, reminding you of that before it moves into this area where it's going to be working on your productivity, your health, your state of being, a little bit more serious things, and trying to shake that up as much as it can, but dipping back into this place of just having fun and being lighthearted and being a little less serious, so that it can pull some of that then even into your 6th house as it goes forward. But yeah, that is, I think, what I have for you, Capricorn. So it's a pretty nice alignment here, and I hope that this retrograde treats you super well. And thank you so much for being here. Right, so for Aquarius, we have Uranus going retrograde from your 5th house of children, creative expression, your own childlike nature, joy, hobbies, interests, things like that, friends, romances, and it's moving backward into your 4th house of your roots, your family, your home. So there's a lot of aspects of family that show up here. So in the 5th house, we see children. In the 4th house, we can see parents or family, home, generally speaking. So if you have a family, I would expect this Uranus traipsing back and forth over that cusp to be really shaking things up when it comes to your family, multiple generations. Another thing with this, a little bit more psychological in nature, is the 5th house can also, both the 4th and the 5th can speak to our childhoods and our experiences of our childhoods. And the 4th house can have that kind of emotional body, like rootedness aspect to it. And yet the 5th house is more lighthearted. It's more our heart space and our joy. And so if there's been any matters of major like conditioning or patterns that we've picked up on either from our parents or because of our childhoods, let me just put it that way, Uranus going through this area is going to be trying to present opportunities and really requesting that you try and look at that and that you try to uproot that, that you try to liberate yourself from any inhibitions or stresses about controlling yourself or controlling matters or trying to fit into a certain mold or something like this that is confining and that makes life less fun for you. So if there's any of that going on, this Uranus would be thrilled to help with that. So I would take advantage of that for sure. There could also be an addition to your family is one thing I'll throw out there as well. But Uranus can also be kind of destabilizing. So the dynamics in your home and your family, with children, with parents, with anyone that you live with, likely to be a bit unpredictable around this time and subject to shifts and changes, redirections, things like that. There could be a move that is relevant around this period of time, or restructuring, reconfiguring your home, either on a physical level or when it comes to people. This could even be a bit of restlessness. Like you may feel like, okay, for instance, I have this mortgage, I have this job, I have this family, so on and so forth. I love it, but there's this spark that's coming up that has me feeling maybe even a bit of a wanderlust, with Uranus moving into your 5th house of wanting to be free and childlike. So there could be some restlessness around your rootedness as well. And I wouldn't say to necessarily make any sort of drastic changes. If there's not a bunch of consequences to doing so, if there's not people who are dependent on you or something like that, then, you know, of course I would say could be worth really exploring something like that. But there's at least going to be that sense of that urge or a bit of restlessness. And I would say if that's the case, just trying to change up your daily life, your family life, maybe introducing like weekly activities that are just for fun where you don't have to worry about other stuff, lightening the mood, basically, I think would be really great. And maybe this isn't something you want to do with your family. Maybe you just want to have like a daily date with yourself, or like a weekly date with yourself to just kind of do something that you really enjoy doing that lightens up your soul. So also really reevaluating how you feel most rooted or at home. This could be totally different for you than it is for most people. Maybe you love to move every once in a while, and that's totally fine. Maybe you feel too rooted with a mortgage, and maybe you're wanting to do some nomad stuff. Maybe you're wanting to like buy a camper and go travel or something like that if you have the opportunity. if that's how you most feel rooted, then that's totally fine. These unconventional ways of doing things, these unconventional comforts that we have, Uranus is going to point those out to us, and it will absolutely help to bring opportunities for us to pursue those things, especially if we're otherwise feeling inhibited or constricted. You may even need to address with your family or with your children or something like this, any sort of patterns within your family dynamics that are just not working for you, that you really need to change. Uranus will help to create some of those changes and to support making those changes. Emotional patterns coming up, potentially calling for healing and integration. I think I kind of addressed that off the bat. So it doesn't just have to be home and family stuff from childhood, but just emotional patterns in general, especially if you're married or something like this, and there have been some patterns that have arisen. This could also speak to those. And yeah, like I said, urge to move or to redecorate, to change your home, or to break some patterns with regard to your family, whatever it is within your family or your home or something like this, that makes it feel a bit burdensome or cumbersome. That's what Uranus would most like to deal with during this time. And yeah, finally, again, just any sort of unconventional comforts that are true to you, true to your spirit, true to your core. Really honoring those, respecting those is going to be great. Remaining open to those. You don't need to fit into any sort of a box when it comes to what makes you feel comfortable, stable, secure. When it comes to how you define your family as well. Comforts that support both stability and freedom, that is what Uranus is most going to love to bring in for you. So even if it just comes down to setting your intentions on becoming clear as to what that is for you, can go a very long way to starting to bring those in. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Aquarius. So I hope that this retrograde treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right. So for Pisces, we have Uranus going retrograde from your 4th house backward into your 3rd house. So your 3rd house being your community, communication, connections, exchange, people, places, things around you, siblings, neighbors. The 4th house has to do with your roots, your core, your family, your home. So it's less lighthearted, a bit deeper, more rooted. This is more the kind of mobile things around us that are changeable and that we just interact with on a day-to-day basis, as well as our mindset and our thoughts and things like this. So this has been changing up since 2018. Your community, your mindset, how you communicate, who you're communicating with, and so forth. It may have even been changing your locality a lot. So your city may have changed either through you moving to a different one, which is one way to do that, or just the city shifting and either growing or shrinking and things like that changing. So there can be some really wonderful breakthroughs along those lines that I'm sure you've witnessed on some levels since 2018, but there's another opportunity here with this going retrograde. Breakthroughs in mindset, communications, your community, your environment. You may feel like if you've been feeling less than satisfied with where you're at, this could even 100% be bringing up a question of, I want to move. I don't want to live here anymore. I'm not having as much fun here. I don't feel very liberated here. And I want to explore and experience something new with the 3rd, 4th house cusp. Because again, this is where you're living, your community and your home, you know. So going across this cusp may have been bringing up these ideas for you. At some point or another, you may decide to act upon that. But if you're able to at least get clear about that, about what choice you might be wanting to make, about how you might be able to set yourself up for that, think that through, strategize around that with the 3rd house there, that would be a really great use of this going back and forth over this cusp. So community and community connections could be serving as something of a big catalyst for you in terms of your own personal growth and development, liberation, evolution. You may run across a book, This could be a YouTube channel, any sort of media, something like that, that also serves as something of a catalyst of bringing you into something that is ultimately going to be speaking to your soul, to your core, that you'll really root yourself in. So this could be like a new interest or something like that that you stick with basically for the rest of your life. Could also be some really radical shifts in your thinking, in your opinions, in your assumptions. And so if those get challenged, I would say just be as lighthearted and open about that as possible. Try not to take your thoughts too seriously. If there are any thought patterns too that you don't love, if there's any sort of negative self-talk or going from A to B in your thought process that's uncomfortable, like a neural pathway that you would love to see changed, this can help a lot with that as well. I would definitely take this opportunity to intend to and to try to change a habit around that. But yeah, even just your ideas, your opinions, your understanding of certain things could be shifting big time in the coming several months. You may also feel a very strong urge to write or to share your ideas, to share your opinions. And this is great. Like if you can converse with people, that can be a really wonderful catalyst in one way or another, even either around how you express yourself and your ideas and feeling more comfortable and liberated and uninhibited in doing so. If you've been shy about writing or publishing, things like that, you may be really surprised by the responses to it, by the engagement with that. So I would also recommend following that path if that's something that you feel at all an urge to do. Yeah, ultimately just reconnecting with curiosity. Exciting conversations and exchanges are much more likely with this here. So considering the fact that those can also be a great catalyst, I would highly recommend engaging with those things. And push yourself outside of your comfort zone when it comes to your communication, your thought processes, your curiosity. Go off the beaten path a bit. Go out of your usual, like local haunts, even if you have a specific place that you tend to go. Maybe try and change it up. Check out another place. It's likely that you're going to come into something during this retrograde that seems new, novel, different, that you wind up really running with for a long time, that feels like a sense of home going forward. But yeah, I think that that is pretty much what I have for you, Pisces. I guess one final thing would be when it comes to communication or connection with family, with siblings, people who feel like family, those connections and those communications, those exchanges are likely to be shifting throughout this period of time too. So I would just kind of remain open to that. And yeah, other than that, I hope that this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for being here.